Hi everyone, and thank you for subscribing to my channel. Today I want to speak about Simon Harris, who gave a nice, easy, inverted commas, interview with RTE's flagship Late Late Show. This is the flagship program which states that it has a viewership of over 650,000 people, but in fact it's dwindling week by week, which is a good thing because we see more people who are tuning out of RTE. Of course, they've been paid over 725 million over the next 3 years out of the public purse to be the state's propagandist. But it's important to get the message out to what is discussed in these interviews, because some people still believe what RTE tells them. And what's interesting with this, of course, most people don't, but unfortunately, we have to keep speaking about it and to cut through the spin that's being pushed through RTE. He spoke initially about housing, or he was asked about housing, and of course he probably got his pre-registered questions were sent to his advisors in advance of his meeting with Patrick Kielty, or his chat with Patrick Kielty. And what was interesting with the chat they had was there was no mention of homelessness. Is that really surprising when you consider Fine Gael, which presided over a disastrous housing and homeless chaos in Irish society? It's a completely manufactured disaster, opened the door to vulture funds, developers, speculators, bankers, big landlords at the expense of the people of Ireland. And of course, the fallout is lack of security for people in rented accommodation, and of course, lack of public housing being built. And the result is massive homelessness. And on top of that, we have an immigration chaos, but we'll come to that in a few minutes, which is adding additional pressure to the already overstretched public services. He spoke about the Housing Activation Officer. This was agreed by the Housing Commission and also was in the programme for government. And what was interesting with this remark is that he said that he wasn't in agreement that Brenda McDonagh should get the role. James Brown, if people remember, is the housing minister, and now he's looking for somebody to hold his hands because he can't cope with a housing brief, and he wants a guy who sold off so much to NAMA to vulture funds and to move into this position. But it's over the last number of days, McDonagh has ruled himself out of this position because he was renting his house, one house in Cabra, out in Airbnb for over €10,000 for a week or 2 weeks, making astronomical profits from Airbnb. And of course, recently, if people remember, the ERSI said the Airbnb issue won't deal with the housing crisis. Well, of course, it's not being addressed, but of course, its entire homes and apartments are taking much needed long-term rental supply out of the so-called rental market. But of course, so much lobbying at play, and especially from those politicians in Ireland that have sold the country out for a couple of pieces of silver, in particular selling out the hotel industry with the immigration chaos. And now they're crying wolf because they want to retain their Airbnbs. So the big profiteers can keep making money, like the Healy Rays and many more government members. And also what's interesting, he said that they should bring in expertise. Now, he wasn't in agreement with the big salary, bring in expertise. Bring in Brenda McDonagh. Expertise. It's just a disaster. How many times can people fall for this? Because it's completely manufactured, contrived housing disaster. As I said, it's not a mistake, it's not an accident, it's not an act of nature, it's not something that came from nowhere. It came because of deliberate government policies, and of course that was because of the bank bailout and the troika conditions in opening the door to vulture funds and stop building public housing. Of course, that was a big condition of that bailout with the IMF, the European Central Bank and the European Union. But don't talk about that. They need expertise because they want to get this right, said Simon Harris. We have to get this right. 14 years later, get it right, Simon. Biggest waffler that ever walked, I think, at this stage, Simon Harris. And of course, he was asked about his own political position in terms of being the shortest serving Taoiseach. Of course, he jumped into that position when Varadkar bailed out last year. Of course, Varadkar is more interested in becoming a celebrity now on his shows on RTE, and his new job working as a spin doctor for a big US company. But that's what they all move into. Ireland's just a merry-go-round of this nonsense. But also what's important as well is that he said that he wanted to get involved because he wants to make a difference. Well, he's made a difference in so many people's lives. Look at all the failures. Let's start with Mr. How many COVIDs did Simon Harris say there was? 100, 200? Oh, it was COVID-19 because it was the 19 COVID. That's the one, isn't it? That's the Minister of our Health himself. Of course, not to mention the failures of the women who were let down under his stewardship of the health department and the outsourcing of all the public health services. But also what's important, he also said, he was asked about the interaction he had with Charlotte Fallon. Now, she was the disability worker that challenged Simon Harris during the election campaign, and Simon Harris just dismissed her rather rudely and abruptly and disgracefully, and just showed his true colours essentially in that confrontation. And a few minutes with a couple of seconds with Charlotte Fallon, absolutely disgraceful treatment of people who care for some of the people who are most need in society of support, but of course are being neglected. And he said he kicked himself very hard over this. He kicked himself very hard. Simon Harris. And he also said he's working day and night, round the clock, to get this right. So he's working round the clock to get this right. Well, last week, let's see where Simon Harris was. He was off at a European People's Party meeting in Spain, so he's working around the clock to get it right. Yeah, Simon. How many air miles has Simon clocked up? Tens of thousands probably at this stage. Went to Washington DC to have negotiate that tariff deal, wasn't it? Simon Harris. Now, of course, he talked about defence spending, or he was asked about defence spending, and he said about the triple lock. He said, yeah, we should get rid of the triple lock because you can't rely on a veto from another country. Well, that's not true, because the reason this triple lock was brought in was to safeguard Irish neutrality. We had to vote twice on referendum in regarding this in Nice. But of course, what's democracy matters to Simon Harris? He won't put this to the people. And it's really a stopgap, essentially, measure. And a measure to protect Irish neutrality. But fundamentally, it should come from the people, but we don't trust the politicians. So it should come from the United Nations General Assembly. At least if it comes there, it stops the drive towards more members of the Defence Forces going off and fighting and dying in wars. And in particular now with what's happened in the Rearm Europe plan. Harris also said that Ukrainian sovereignty is so important and we have to keep supporting Ukraine. Many millions or billions of euros spent in Ukraine, the temporary protection directive, the immigration fallout, and notwithstanding the pressure on accommodation services, health services, and all the other stuff that's going on. Remember that with the pets that were relocated to Ireland? And then plus you can go back for a 3-week holiday at Christmas. So all this sort of nonsense going on. But Ireland again put the hands up for being the best boys in the class for the European Union. And he also spoke about Trump, and he said he has to learn diplomacy. So really nothing to see here with this chat. But of course, what wasn't mentioned, of course, as I said, homelessness wasn't mentioned. So many crises we have weren't mentioned. Of course, the massive anti-government demonstrations were not mentioned because he believes in democracy. He doesn't believe in democracy coming from the streets. That's where it comes from. But of course, this was ignored, and the whole issues around mass immigration were ignored by the political establishment. Legal and illegal mass immigration in Irish society. We see that with a race to the bottom, and at the same time we see a bigger chasm and divide in Irish society towards those that have versus those that don't, and at the same time all facilitated by Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and successive government policies. But of course we have to get this right, Simon. You have to get this right. So don't fall for any Harris's spin. Don't fall for any Martin spin, or the Lowry-led independent spin, or the Green Party spin, or the Labour Party spin, or any of the so-called opposition spin, because it's all one of the same. Essentially you need a strong opposition in Irish society, but you don't have it in the political theatre that is the Dáil. And at the same time, it really will have to come from communities, from the grassroots up, and fundamentally that's why these issues are being ignored by the propagandists such as radio telefís éireann, who are in receipt, as I stated at the outline, of 725 million over the next 3 years to push the political establishment's narrative. And they'll only have people on who are on varying sides of the establishment's narrative, but we still won't challenge the underlying narrative and the underlying nexus of control. And of course, Emily O'Reilly, when she was leaving the European Union as ombudsman a number of months ago, she said that the European Commission was being ran like a powerful consigliere, mafia connotations, criminal classes, ultimately. That's what they are. And they represent those that have versus those that don't. But at the same time, they're attacking basic rights across Europe, drive towards authoritarianism, clamping down on freedom of expression. And these are all sacrosanct rights that people should have in any functioning and healthy society. So thanks so much for supporting my videos, really appreciate them. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting, and thanks everybody who continues to subscribe to my channel. And I'm very grateful to each and every one of you for subscribing to my channel. It's growing day by day, which is great to see, and it's great to see more and more people who are more aware of what's going on in Irish society. So please share my videos and think for yourself about what's really going on in Irish society and counter the narrative that's being pushed down the throats of so many people in Irish society. Start the conversations, have the discussions, get up the local forum groups in your areas, and that's how change will come from. It'll come from below. It'll come from the streets. It'll come from our communities, our towns, our villages in Ireland to stand up for the interests and needs of the people of Ireland. So from Dublin, thanks a lot for the support, and I'll see you all soon. Slán, take care.